I propose to take questions 1 and 5 together. Are we off again? As deputies will be aware, last December, on behalf of Government, I extended an invitation to the members of the Public Services Committee of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions to enter discussions with public service management on a new agenda for reductions in the cost of delivery of public services and substantial long-term productivity improvements and workplace reforms. Intensive engagement has taken place over the last number of weeks between the parties to the discussions, which were facilitated by the Labour Relations Commission. These discussions concluded last Monday morning. I attended a plenary session of the parties to the discussions at which the Labour Relations Commission tabled proposals for an agreement. This has been an extremely challenging and complex process. The Government had sought to reach an agreement that allows substantial costs to be extracted and enhanced public service productivity to the benefit of all those who rely on public services, while also ensuring that savings were achieved in a way that is broadly equitable and impacts most on those who are best able to afford it. The Government said from the outset that in order to support our determination to restore order to the public finances and to meet our fiscal targets on additional savings of €1 billion in the Public Service Pay and Pensions Bill, that would be necessary to be achieved by the end of 2015, and that €300 million of that would be needed this year to meet our spending targets. I am pleased to say that the revised measures, as recommended by the Labour Relations Commission, have been evaluated as meeting the budgetary targets of the Government over the lifetime of the agreement. They also address many of the concerns expressed by the staff representatives during the negotiations. I recognise that all public service workers have already made a significant contribution to our economic recovery. However, these further measures are absolutely required to achieve a sustainable reduction in payroll costs, sufficient to enable us to meet our fiscal targets. I acknowledge that the negotiators for the public service unions were able to mitigate the effects of a number of management proposals. The draft agreement will run for 3 years from the 1st of July of this year. It contains a number of measures aimed at significant cost extraction and changes to terms and conditions to public service workers, all of which have the objective of returning the Public Service Pay and Pensions Bill to a sustainable path. The detailed proposals were published yesterday evening, and copies have been placed in the Oireachtas Library. The main elements of the proposed agreement are as follows. This is a 3-year agreement to run from the 1st of July of this year. Over the course of the agreement, the overall savings target set by Government will be achieved. There will be a direct pay reduction for those on remuneration in excess of €65,000. An increment freeze of varying lengths at different pay ranges is provided for. A 3-year freeze for those over €65,000, 2 3-month freezes, i.e. 2 15-month increment periods rather than 12-month increment periods for those between 35 and 65, and a single 3-month freeze for those under €35,000. That is, instead of a 12-month increment cycle, there will be a 15-month increment cycle. Also, in the interests of equity, there will be balancing measures for those on the max of the scale through the loss of leave or partial temporary recoupment of an increment. Additional productivity through extra hours work for most public servants. Those currently working 35 hours or under will in future work a minimum of 37 hours. Those working 35 and under 39 hours will in future work 39 hours. Remaining overtime costs will be paid at a reduced rate, at time and a half at the first point of the scale for those on less than 35,000, and time and a quarter to individuals on the scale of those over 35,000. Public servants on 39 hours who have worked overtime will make available an hour's unpaid overtime per week. Twilight payments will be eliminated, and a reduced rate of time and 3/4 for Sunday pay will be implemented. Supervision and substitution payments in the education sector will be eliminated. There are a range of additional savings associated with the agreement, including in the defence and prison sectors, public service pensions, etc., and all of those are laid out in the document that has been published. There are a range of additional savings, as I said. A series of long-term workplace reforms have also been agreed as part of the deal, including revision of flexi-time arrangements and work-sharing patterns, revision to redeployment provisions, strengthening performance management arrangements, proposals in the area of grade restructuring. As I've said throughout, this is a draft agreement based on proposals by the Labour Relations Commission. It is now a matter for the trade unions and the representative associations to consider these proposals in advance to putting them to a ballot of their members in accordance with their own rules and regulations.
We have two questions here, Deputy Sean Fleming, Deputy Miriam MacDonald. So Deputy Fleming first. And then
Thank you, Laskin Corlin, and welcome the opportunity of discussing the proposed agreement on public service pay with the Minister here in the House. It's the first opportunity we've had to do that since the agreement, the proposed agreement was announced earlier in the week. First of all, Minister, I think you will have to agree there is a lack of fairness in relation to the proposal put out so far. There's nothing in it about protecting all public services and especially frontline services for the people of Ireland. And really the document is completely light on reform. There's nothing in it about protecting the emergency and the 24-hour services that are needed by people over weekends. In particular, where it's most unfair, low-paid workers who work weekends, people in the health services, be it nurses' aides, cleaning staff, catering staff in our hospitals, guards, firemen and prison officers, are facing a cut of up to 8%. And Minister, if you have avoided telling us what the level of savings. You didn't mention one figure in the savings. I think you're talking about $1 billion over 3 years. Some people thought it was going to be $1 billion per annum at the end in 2015. So it's fine. So you want to save about $350 million per annum. That's about 2% of the public sector pay and pensions bill of $17 billion. So you want to achieve a 2% cut in that, but you're making some of the weekend workers sacrifice up to 8%. So is that the amount of time we have?
No, sorry, no, I meant just ask you to put a question in.
Oh yeah, I will be putting the question. I want a commitment that you will equalise the payments for new recruits, not just for teachers, but also for nurses and prison service and guards when you're recruiting. And Minister, it's not fair that some people on 30,000 will be taking an 8% cut and some people on 60,000 will take no cut whatever. Some people on the same pay rate, whether it's 40, 50 or 60,000, will have different levels of pay cuts in terms of the make-up of their pay, if it's based on premium or weekend pay, and it's not got to do with their overall pay. Finally, Minister, I want you to reconsider the issue in relation to redundancy. The commitment for no compulsory redundancy is heavily qualified, and the document says voluntary departure would be appropriate in some circumstances. I want you to remove. Will you please remove that, and will you answer the questions in relation to the targeted redundancy package that you've announced several times? It's not specifically mentioned here. Is this additional savings on top of this agreement, Croke Park extension, or is it included in this? And finally, it's unfair. Would you not accept? It's unfair that when you're only seeking a 2% cut in the public sector payroll bill, you're asking some low-paid workers to take pay cuts of 8%. That's the definition of unfairness.
Tara, I'm surprised and a little bit disappointed at the attitude of the Deputy opposite. The premise on which he's poised all his questions is false. The annual savings required is $1 billion. To be achieved starting this year, but obviously this is a half a year. Between now, it'll ratchet up to be the full $1 billion annualised savings by 2015. So all your percentages and all that is wrong. Let me deal with the next point you make in terms of fairness. This is fundamentally a fair deal. And many objective observers who have taken the time to read the document and analyse it, and we have looked at this very carefully. One of the prime objectives of the government was to extract the money we need to extract in a way that is fair and affects everybody to some degree, and those best able to the most. And that's why we have an actual pay cut for those over 65,000. In relation to those on premium pay and frontline service and frontlines, there are people who work relatively short hours and maximise their pay by making sure that it's in the premium sector. Now, some of that is required. There are two elements to that. There is how the rosters are determined, and some people find themselves rostered for an extraordinary amount of Sunday and holiday work, and obviously then the rate that is to be paid. We have reduced the Sunday pay by, we intended by a factor of a quarter, from double time to time and a half, but we've settled to reduce it only by an eighth to time and 3/4.
Thank you, Minister.
If you look at objectively, and we've looked at who would be affected by this, it is a fair imbalance. Now, if you were to pick somebody who works only Sundays or works a disproportionate number of Sundays and premium days, you might be able to find somebody who would be well out of the norm and the line. But taken across 290,000 public sector workers, and you can't craft an agreement that this is a very complicated agreement in order to be as objective and as fair as possible. That's why it is so complicated.
Thank you, Minister.
In order to do that, we have made it complicated, but objectively, unless you were to take the extreme, it is fair.
Margaret, Deputy Mayor McDonald.
Minister, we didn't have to travel very far to find somebody or some bodies to give the lie to your claim that this agreement is in any way fair or equitable. In fact, the people came to us. They're just a sample of the workers who are badly hit by this agreement. They were outside the gates of this stall yesterday, and there were firefighters. And the firefighters, having studied the agreement, are clear that they will face a cut in the order of between 8 and 10% to their take-home pay. Now, these are workers, like others within the service, and you're familiar with this, Minister, who are just about getting by at this point. They're just about meeting their bills, just about meeting their rent or mortgages. Many of them have young families. And the question that they, as not just as commentators, but as people who will really experience the full impact of this deal, the question they're asking is, what kind of bubble is this minister and this government in, that they don't understand just what kind of impact this is going to have on their lives? They reckon that you will drive them into debt. They reckon that you will drive many of their colleagues across the public sector into poverty. As you are aware, Minister, up to 10% of those currently in receipt of family income support work within the public sector. This brings me to my second point, because my question to you was whether or not you were going to protect low and middle income workers, and the answer to that is you did not. You claim very disingenuously that there are only pay cuts for those earning in excess of €65,000. Now, you may play with words, Minister, but you know full well that workers across the spectrum are going to experience a real and substantial cut to their wages. Nurses, for instance, on €35,000 or €40,000 are looking at an 8% cut. So please don't play the game of make-believe that it's only a certain section that will experience the cut. And here's the worst aspect of all of this. The public frustration, you see, which is one that I share, is that you do have a set of people within the public service who are overpaid and overpensioned. There's absolutely no debate about that. They include government ministers, secretary-generals. They're across the system, and there's 6,000 of them. The demand for fairness and for reining in the pay bill should correctly have been directed at that set of people. It is not fair or sustainable to ask the state to pay multiples of a fair salary to senior public officials. But you weren't prepared, Minister, to go after them.
I have to call on the Minister.
You weren't prepared to go after them, bar in the most light-handed of ways.
And in fairness, I will call the Minister. You have a question on the pensions, I think, of your Minister.
No, this isn't on pensions. This is on pay, I do have other issues.
The Deputy is, of course, not asking questions because she doesn't want to hear answers. She came last Count Corda to a conclusion about this before the document was even published. Within an hour of the talks concluding, Deputy MacDonald was on the national airwaves denouncing the agreement and denouncing those who negotiated the agreement in a shocking, shabby abuse of people who had worked very hard to represent their members. She didn't even have the courtesy to read the document before she came to her venomous conclusion. Now, in relation to the general point that Deputy MacDonald has made from the beginning, that you need not touch, you can make the savings by dealing with the 6,000 people in the public service out of 290,000 who earn more than 100,000. So there's a question, I don't want to preempt, but it will be clear from the answer to the question that will get less than 20% if we were to do that, which would, of course, destroy our health services, destroy our judiciary, destroy the basis of all of this. Even if we were to do that, it wouldn't get 20% of the savings that we require. So it is a nonsense, but the problem about it is Deputy MacDonald and her party knows that, because you don't have to look further than her party in Northern Ireland to see the policies they're actually implementing there. And she thinks that, for some reason, that she can perpetrate this falsehood here, and it's going to be to the advantage of her party in the future. This is a complex deal negotiated by professional, competent negotiators representing 390,000 workers. Some walked out of the process. The vast majority of represented stayed in the process. It is now, and I ask this Lascian Corla particularly, it is now a matter for the workers in the public service to make their judgment. And I would ask them I'd ask deputies in the House not to use this place as a bully pit in terms of charging one way or the other in relation to this. The facts are laid out. They have been negotiated openly over many weeks by professional, competent negotiators. They will give their advices to their own members, and each public sector worker will make their own decisions in their own lights.
Very briefly, because we're Deputy Fleming, could have your cooperation, please.
Minister, I'll be very brief. Just 2 quick points. My first question. I don't even believe whoever drafted the answer read it. You just came in with a statement on Croke Park. I had asked about the savings, and during your opening script, you never mentioned one figure once. And the only time you mentioned a figure was in reply to me when you mentioned $1 billion. You should have given us some figure of information in relation to that, and I'd ask you to correct that. But the second thing is, my question was very simple. The first question on the priority was, is this agreement contingent on the successful conclusion of the Croke Park deal? In other words, Minister, if there is not a successful conclusion and agreement to this, will you be legislating to have the proposals accepted? You didn't deal with that issue, and I'd ask you to confirm that. And in relation to members of the House not contributing, would be helpful if the members of your own national executive who were involved in the talks every time they came on television didn't mention Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael.
Thank you.
They are politicising the process already.
Deputy MacDonald, briefly, please.
Well, the answer to my question that I put to you, Minister, is a clear no from you. You weren't prepared to prioritise low and middle income workers. You certainly weren't prepared to prioritise frontline workers. And of course, this is an ongoing discussion. The ongoing ask of your government is to name and to deal with the small minority of people who are overpaid and overpensioned. And this agreement reflects categorically that you are not prepared to do that. But you'll put your hand in the pocket of a Garda or a firefighter or a nurse. You've no difficulty doing that. And I think people should bear in mind that these kinds of cuts in respect of frontline workers and in respect of clerical grades across the service have a real impact in terms of the services delivered.
Deputy MacDonald, could you please frame a
Minister,
question, please?
And the statistics are pretty startling. 9,500 carers waiting for their applications to be processed. The average time for this processing is now 6 months. All of that is connected to a strategy that has been about shrinking the public service, hammering people on very average incomes, and at all costs protecting people at the very top.
Deputy, I call the Minister
and I would be equally critical of the trade unions for protecting people who they know and you know and I know are overpaid. They earn more than the British Prime Minister, than the French President. We cannot continue with that system and with that level of overpayment whilst hammering people further down the line.
Final reply, Minister.
You might say, Lascian Corla, this is question time. Deputy MacDonald has never been interested in answers. Always back of the lorry speeches, denying the realities or the facts. This is a fair deal. It's a matter for individual workers now to come to their own conclusions in relation to it. We need to make these savings. This is a negotiated deal that the workers' representatives determined as far as they could and reshaped the proposals put on the table. The notion that there is some magic formula, no more than Deputy Adams, who can have his magic formulas by getting rid of the Troika, we don't need their money. Why would we when we can go abroad for healthcare? We don't need to depend on healthcare here. If you're in his imaginary world, his bubble that you talk about, where they all live on the average industrial wage, but they have a lifestyle that no average industrial worker in this country can even aspire to. So that fantasy land will be seen as hollow. Our job as a government, Lascan Corley, is to provide real solutions for the economic crisis this country has faced. Incrementally, we're making those repairs. We're rebalancing our public pay bill. And I want finally to say this. I acknowledge the extraordinary work of public sector workers. Nobody has defended Croke Park more than I have for the last 2 years, on the basis that we needed ultimately to look at how we can ensure that our payroll and our services are fit for purpose, fit for the income stream we have. This deal will allow us to get to there. And I've made a commitment that if this is accepted, there'll be no more ask for public sector workers. I hope that they will accept it on that basis and not be distracted by fantasy or rhetoric of those who are not interested in the recovery of this country, but only in their own political fortune.
Thank you, Minister.